Okay, as we look at our final review on number 1, it says it wants us to list the irrational numbers. So it gives us a list of irrational or of numbers, and we need to find the irrational number that's in this list. So here's my list, and so off to the side here, I've gone ahead to remind you exactly which numbers belong to which group. And so you'll notice first off, I've listed the natural numbers. So remember, these are the numbers that come naturally. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. Now your whole numbers include all natural numbers, and it also includes 0. So you'll notice your list of whole numbers is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. And then your integers include all whole numbers and their opposites. So that includes your list of -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And then you've got your rational numbers, and your rational numbers are any number that can be expressed as a fraction when simplified. So for example, if you look at this rational set here, 1 can be written as a fraction, 1 over 1, -5 can be written as a fraction, -5 over 1. The square root of 25 is also rational because it can be simplified down to 5. And then 0.24, of course, that's 24 all over 100, so on and so forth. So there's your list of rational numbers. And then your irrational numbers is any number that can't be expressed as a fraction when simplified. So there's several that fall into this category. There's like pi, 3.14, and that goes on. The number e, and then of course your radicals that can't be simplified. The square root of 2, square root of 3, and the square root of 4 wouldn't fall in that because the square root of 4 can be reduced to 2, so on and so forth. So those are your number systems that you'll need to remember. And so as you look at your number systems, you just have to go through here, and we just have to identify which number in this list right here is irrational. So irrational means it can't be a fraction. So of course 5, that is rational. The square root of 5 can't be written as a fraction, so you'll notice that is irrational. -15 can be, so 0 can be as a fraction, so 3/4 can also be as a fraction. Square root of 25 reduced to 5. 0.5 repeating can be simplified as a fraction, so on and so forth. So your answer for your irrational set is just going to be the square root of 5. On number 2, it says that we have this equation, this algebraic expression. So we've got x, y to the 6th all over x to the 4th, y. And notice this is all to the -2 power. So you're going to notice that this -2 could apply to everything inside of the parentheses. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it to everything inside the parentheses. So when I do that and I apply it to this first one right here, I'm going to be left with x to the -2. I apply it to the second one and I get y to the 6th to the -2. I apply it to the one down here, I get x to the 4th to the -2 and y to the -2. Distribute the -2 power to all my variables. Now, after I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and simplify each one of these. So you're going to notice x to the -2 stays to x to the -2. So y to the 6th to the -2, I multiply that and it becomes y to the -12. X to the 4th to the -2 becomes x to the -8, and y to the -2 stays at y to the -2. So remember your power to power rule, you multiply your powers together. So now I'm going to go ahead and change the powers to positive. So remember, for in the numerator, they go to the denominator, and if they're in the denominator, they go to the numerator. So this x to the -2, get rid of its -2 power. I change it, it goes to the denominator. I've got x to the -8, so it's in the denominator, so it goes to the numerator, it becomes x to the 8th. I've got y to the -12. I change that to y to the 12, it's in the numerator, so it goes to the denominator. And now my y to the -2 goes to my numerator, which is y to the 2nd. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and simplify this. So to simplify this, remember I've got 8 x's, I've got 2 x's, so that means that 8 minus 2 is going to be 6. And I've got 2 and 12, so I've got 2 y's on top, 12 y's on bottom, so 2 of them cross out, and I'm left with 10 on the bottom. And so that's going to be my answer, x to the 6th, y to the 10th. Okay, number 3, the directions say rationalize the denominator. So remember, you're going to rationalize your denominator by multiplying by the conjugate. So remember, those conjugates are half and opposite. So here's my denominator, and I'm going to go ahead and multiply by its conjugate. Well, the conjugate is that half and opposite, so I'm going to multiply both numerator and denominator by 9 plus the square root of 2. So to go ahead and do the numerator, I'm going to go ahead and distribute this on through. So I got 5 times 9 is going to be 45. I got 5 times the square root of 2 is just going to be 5 square root of 2. Now my denominator, I'm going to have to FOIL this out. So first outside, inside, last. So I do my first. 9 times 9 is going to be 81. My outsides, I'm going to multiply 9 and the square root of 2, so I get positive 9 square root of 2. Insides, I'm going to go ahead and multiply the square root of 2 and 9, I get negative 9 square root of 2. And then for my last, I've got negative square root of 2 times positive square root of 2, that's going to be minus 2. So now that I've FOILed that out and rationalized it, I'm going to go ahead and simplify this down. So simplify this down. Notice nothing in the numerator simplifies, so I just got 45 plus 5 square root of 2. And in my denominator, my 9 square root of 2 and my negative 9 square root of 2 cancel out. I just take 81 minus 2 and I get 79. And so that's going to be my answer. My answer is going to be 45 plus 5 square root of 2 all over 79. On number 4, I've got x minus 3 times x squared plus 3x plus 9. It just says find the product. So you remember your rule. Whenever you're multiplying polynomials together, you just multiply all the terms of the one polynomial by all the terms of the other polynomial. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to multiply those on through. And I like to draw arrows as I do this. I take x times x squared, and I get x to the third. I take x times 3x, and that's going to give me plus 3x squared. I take x times 9, I get plus 9x. I'm going to go ahead and distribute this negative 3 on through. So I take negative 3, multiply by my x squared, and I get negative 3x squared. I take negative 3 times 3x. That's going to give me this negative 9x. The negative 3 times 9 is going to be negative 27. So now that I've gone ahead and multiplied all the terms of one polynomial by all the terms of the other polynomial, all I have to do is just combine my like terms. So combining my like terms, so notice nothing to combine this x cubed with, so I'm just going to go ahead and write it down. So here's my x cubed, so nothing to combine with, I get x cubed. My 3x squared and negative 3x squared cancel. I have a 9x and a negative 9x, they also cancel. And nothing to combine with the negative 27, so I just go ahead and write it down. So there's my answer, x cubed minus 27 when I combine my like terms. On number 5, just wants me to factor this problem. So I got x squared plus 4x minus 77. So I'm going to find the factors of negative 77 that add up to be 4. So here's my factors, negative 77. So my two factors, in other words, the two numbers multiplied together of negative 77, I've got 11 times negative 7. And so that's going to give me that. 11 and negative 7 is going to give me that positive 4 in the middle. So then I just go ahead and fill it in, and my answer is x plus 11 times x minus 7. Okay, number 6. So number 6, it says that it wants me to go ahead and directions say, first write the values that make the denominator 0, then solve the equation. So you're going to notice that, first thing I do is I notice that I have my x plus 1 right here. I have my x minus 1, and then right here I have x plus 1, x minus 1. So I know that x cannot equal plus or minus 1, because that would make my denominator 0. So I'm going to go ahead and solve this problem. So I'm going to multiply all my terms by the least common denominator. So my least common denominator is x plus 1 and x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply this first term by x plus 1, x minus 1. So you're going to notice that when I multiply this by x plus 1, x minus 1, the x plus 1's cross out, and I'm just left with 5 times x minus 1. When I multiply this next term by x plus 1, x minus 1, you're going to notice the x minus 1's cross out, and I'm just going to be left with my 2 times my x plus 1. Then I'm going to multiply this last term by it. You're going to notice the x plus 1's cross out, the x minus 1's cross out. I'm just going to be left with 4. Now that I've done that, I'm just left with an algebraic equation that I can solve. So to solve this algebraic equation, I'm just going to go ahead and distribute my 5 on through. So I take 5 times x, gives me 5x. Take negative 1 times 5, I get negative 5. I take 2 times x, I go and get 2x. 2 times 1 is going to be 2. And I still have my 4 right here. Combining like terms, so combining my like terms together, I've got my 5x, I've got my 2x, I combine those together, I get 6x. I've got a negative 5, and a positive 2 is going to give me a negative 3. And I'm left with my 4. So now to go ahead and finish this off, I'm going to go ahead and add 4 to both sides. So adding 4 to both sides, or sorry, adding 3 to both sides, so adding my 3 to my 4, that's going to give me that 7. So I divide both sides by 7, and I get x equals 1. But I remember back here, I said that my answers couldn't be 1 or negative 1. So since I got one of those answers, I have to reject it. So rejecting this one answer right here, my answer is going to be no solution. Okay, number 7, it says perform the indicated operations and write the result in standard form. So the first thing I need to remember is that the square root of negative 1 is equal to I. I'm going to go ahead and break this down. So I'm going to break this down in the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 121. Because every time I have the square root of negative 1, that gives me an I. I still have my square root of 5. I've got my minus sign here, so the square root of negative 1 becomes I, and the square root of 121 is 11. So now just writing it so it looks a little bit nicer, I've got I square root of 5 minus 11I. So number 8, the directions say, solve the equation using the quadratic formula. So you need to remember what the quadratic formula is. So your quadratic formula is going to be negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I just need to remember that this number is a, so that a equals 2. This number right here is b, so b is equal to 12. This number here is going to be my c, which is equal to 3. Now that I know that, it's just actually a matter of substituting in those numbers and solving it. So notice, in place of my b, I put my 12, and I still have my negative sign, so that's negative 12 plus or minus. Now putting in this 12 in place of my b squared. So I got 12 squared, and I got minus 4, so I still have my 4 right here. So a is equal to 2, so I put my 2 right here, and then c is equal to 3. And then in the bottom, I've got 2a, so putting in my a for 2, so that's 2 times 2. Now that I've done that, I can go ahead and simplify this. So just be a little bit careful with your simplification. Most students do okay just substituting it in. If you're going to make a mistake, it's usually right in here. This is what I like to be careful with. So I like to write that out a little bit separate. So I can take my 12 squared, that's 144. And then 4 times 2 times 3, so 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is going to be 24. So I usually do that part first because that's where most people make their mistake. And then I got the 144, and subtract the 24, and you get 120. You still have your negative 12 here, and you have your 2 times 2, which is going to equal 4. So I got negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 120 all over 4. So the square root of 120 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 30. So I've separated that out right here. So now I rewrite this as negative 12 plus or minus 2 square root of 30 all over 4. And now I can go ahead and simplify that even further, and simplify it even further. I'm going to go ahead and take that square root of 4 and change that to 2. So here I've got negative 12 plus or minus 2 square root of 30 all over 4. And now I can go ahead and divide that same number out of all 3 terms. So notice there's that common 2 in every place. I divided all 3 terms by my 2. So when I do that, I get negative 6. And 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1, so that's not there anymore. And then 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. So my answer is going to be negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 30 all over 2. Now number 9 says, my directions on number 9, it just wants me to go ahead and solve this radical equation. So remember, to solve a radical equation, I'm going to have to solve my equation with the radical sign. So here's my radical sign. The word radical means root. So this is a radical right here. That's a radical sign, also known as a root sign. I'm going to go ahead and solve my radical sign and then go ahead and finish it off. So you're going to notice the first thing I do is I just go ahead and subtract 11 from both sides. So when I subtract 11 from both sides, so here I'm subtracting 11, I'm going to get x minus 4. So 7 minus 11 is x minus 4. At this point right here, to get rid of this radical, I'm going to go ahead and square both sides. Now remember, when you square both sides, that crosses out this radical right here, so you're left with 2x. And now this one, remember I have to FOIL it, so I wrote that down here, x minus 4 times x minus 4. So I'm going to do first, so first is x squared, outside is negative 4x, inside is negative 4x, and then last is going to be 16, so don't forget to FOIL anytime that you have anything squared. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms. So you're going to notice this negative 4x, and negative 4x is going to give you this negative 8x. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring my 2x on over here. So notice I subtract 2x, so minus 2x. And now I'm left with this equation of x squared minus 10x plus, I'll just draw this in a little bit, it didn't come off too well on the copier, plus 16. So now we just have to factor this. So the factor of 16 that adds up to be negative 10 is going to be negative 8 and negative 2. So I go ahead and factor this to x minus 8 and x minus 2. So I set each one of these factors equal to 0. So this gives me 8 as an answer. This gives me 2 as an answer. And when I check each solution, I notice that when I substitute it back in the original equation, 2 times 8 is 16. The square root of 16 is going to be 4. And 4 plus 11 is going to be 15. And then that's 8 plus 7, which is also 15. So that solution worked. But notice the solution right here, the square root of 4 is 2. So it gives me 2 plus 11 equals 2 plus 7. That does not work. So we have to go ahead and cancel that one out. So the only solution to that one is x equals 8. Okay, on this next problem on number 10, it says I have 8x minus 5 is greater than 7x plus 1. It says solve the inequality and graph the solution set on the number line. Express the solution set using interval notation. So to solve this, I just add 5 to both sides. So adding 5 to both sides, I'm going to get 8x, and then I get the 7x plus 6. Subtracting 7x from both sides, I get x is greater than 6. So now to graph this, I'm just going to go ahead and graph it on the number line. So notice I go to the number 6 right here. So here's 0, and I go over here to 6. Put a little 6 there, and remember to use your new notation. So in this case right here, we're going to use a parenthesis because this is greater than. So using a parenthesis, and it says x greater than 6, so the arrow goes that way. And then remember, in interval notation, parenthesis means it's not equal to, so 6 comma infinity would be your interval notation answer. Okay, number 11, it says use the given conditions to write an equation for the line in the indicated form. So it's going to pass through 2, negative 4 in parallel to the line whose equation is y equals negative 4x plus 7. So notice I show you both ways to do it. You can either use this form, y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1, or you can use y equals mx plus b. Both those are used to write equations. So here's my x sub 1, my y sub 1. So x sub 1 is 2, y sub 1 is negative 4. So all I'm going to do is just substitute that in to my x sub 1. There's my y sub 1. And now I just have to find my slope. So remember, if it's parallel, that means it has the same slope. And so I just have to find the slope of this equation right here. So the slope is just this number in front of x. That's going to be negative 4. So I'm going to substitute in this into my slope, and so that's negative 4. Once I've done that, I simplify that down. So minus minus right here makes us a y plus 4. Then go and distribute the negative 4 on through, so I get negative 4x and then plus 8. And then I just have to go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides. And when I subtract 4 from both sides, that gives me my final answer of y equals negative 4x plus 4. Now, if you use the other method to go ahead and solve this, you're going to notice it's just, again, a matter of substitution. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this other one right here and look at using the y equals mx plus b. So if you use y equals mx plus b, here is your y value right here. You can put that in for y. Here's your x value right here. You can put that in for x. And then your slope, we just found out is negative 4. You can put that in for your slope. And now you just have to solve for your y-intercept, or your b. So I got negative 4. Well, negative 4 times 2 is going to be negative 8. And then you're going to go ahead and add 8 to both sides. And get 4 equals your y-intercept. Now I just go ahead and substitute those numbers in. And there you have your equation. So we've got y. So now since we're writing the equation, we'll go ahead and leave the variables in there. So we got y. So we just found out that our slope was negative 4. And our b, which is 4. And there's your equation, y equals negative 4x plus 4. So either way that you do it, you'll get the exact same answer. It doesn't really matter which one you use. You can either use y equals mx plus b, or you can use y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. Both forms work. Okay, number 12. It says that it wants us to go ahead and it says write the standard form of the equation of the circle with the given center and radius. So remember the general form of a circle. And the way I remember it is I remember the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared all equals c squared. And so my a value becomes my x, my b becomes my y, and my c is my radius when I insert a triangle onto the circle form. So now with the shift in the movement, you're going to notice that it becomes this form, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared all equals r squared. So notice, here's my center. That's going to be my h and my k, and here's my radius, which is 11. So substituting this in, I got negative 5. Now notice when you do this, you just get your equation x plus 5 squared. And substituting in this for y, and it makes sense because that is the x value and that is the y value. So substituting that in, we got y minus 3 squared. And then here's my radius squared, which is 11. 11 squared is going to be 121. So the equation for that circle is x plus 5 squared plus y minus 3 squared all equals 121. On this next problem, on number 13, looks like we want to go ahead and find a composite on number 13. So remember, composites is where we're putting equations inside of equations. So there are two equations that the book gives us. It says we've got f of x equals 7x plus 9, and we've got g of x equals 5x minus 1. So composite function, we're putting equations inside of equations. Remember, read from inner parentheses to the outer. So if you remember right from last year, you can rewrite this as f of g of x. In other words, I'm going to put g of x equation into my f equation. So to do that, here's my g of x equation. That's 5x minus 1. I'm going to put this equation inside of this equation. So when I do that, you're going to notice that this is 7 times 5x minus 1 plus 9. So that is f composite g of x, or f of g of x. So now we just need to go ahead and simplify this. So to simplify it, I'm going to distribute and combine anything that's like. So I got 7 times 5x, 35x, minus 7. I still have my plus 9. So I take my negative 7 plus 9, I again get positive 2. So f composite g of x is 35x plus 2. Okay, number 14, it says find the inverse of the one-to-one function. So remember your rules to finding inverses. So rule number 1, you're going to change f of x to y. So change this, f of x to y, you get y equals 5x minus 3 all over 8. So my second rule, I'm going to switch the x and the y. I'm going to interchange them. So notice my y now becomes my x. My x now becomes my y. So that's rule number 2. Now rule number 3, I'm going to go ahead and solve this equation for y. So rule number 3 says solve for y. So notice to solve for y, I'm going to multiply both sides by 8. And so I'm going to be left with 8x. And now on this side, the cross out, I'm left with 5y minus 3. So I'm going to go ahead and add 3 to both sides. So when I do that, I get 8x plus 3 all equals 5y. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 5. So I get 8x plus 3 over 5 all equals y. So in step number 4, I'm going to change my y to my new notation that means inverse. So I'm going to rewrite this as f inverse of x all equals 8x plus 3 over 5. So my y becomes my f inverse. And that's how you find your inverse function. Okay, on number 15. It says C of x, it says the cost of millions of dollars for a company to manufacture X thousand automobiles is given by the function C of x equals 3x squared minus 18x plus 63. Find the number of automobiles that must be produced to minimize the cost. Okay, what you need to do is you need to recognize that since this is an equation, is parabolic, the vertex is the minimum. So to figure out the formula we're going to write the quadratic formula. And in the quadratic formula, this part of it is your vertex. So here's the part of your quadratic formula that is the vertex. So I'm going to use this number right here, negative b over 2a, to find the number that gives me the minimum cost. So to do that, I just need to remember what is a, what is b, and what is c. So in this case right here, I just need to remember this number is a, this number is b, and then this number right here be my c. So using negative b over 2a, so I've got my negative. So here's my b, which is negative 18, so negative 18. And then I have my 2. I'm going to multiply that by my a, which is 3. So working this out, that gives me a positive 18. Negative makes that a positive. And so then 2 times 3 is going to be 6. So take 18 divided by 6, and I get 3 for my answer. So since this is in thousands, my answer is going to be 3,000 automobiles that would go ahead and minimize my cost. Okay, number 16, it says use synthetic division to divide f of x equals x cubed minus 3x squared minus 18x plus 40 by x minus 2. And then go ahead and use the result to find all the zeros of f. So here I'm going to take this equation. I got x cubed minus 3x squared minus 18x plus 40 and divided by x minus 2. So I write down all my coefficients. So this coefficient is 1. This coefficient is negative 3, negative 18, and 40. So now I'm going to go ahead and take this. I find its answer. I'm going to put that in my box right here. So my first step, I'm going to go ahead and bring down the 1. And then I multiply. So 2 times 1 is going to be 2. And then I add. So negative 3 plus 2 is going to be negative 1. So I repeat it. So 2 times negative 1 is going to be negative 2. I add these together, and I get negative 20. I take 2 and multiply by negative 20, I get negative 40. And 40 plus negative 40 gives me 0. So now that I've done that, I recognize that here is my equation that is represented by those answers. So here's my equation right here. So the 2, remember its equation is x minus 2. So now this is 1x squared minus 1x minus 20. Okay, so now that I've written the equation from synthetic division, I got to factor this. So the factors of 20 that add up to be negative 1. It's going to be negative 5 and positive 4. So now I've got x minus 2 times x minus 5 times x plus 4. So I write my answers. So 2, 5, and negative 4. Okay, on number 17, it says factor the polynomial, and then write the polynomial as completely factored form involving complex non-real or imaginary numbers. So I got to find the factors of 28 that add up to be negative 12. So the factors of 28 that add up to be negative 12 is negative 14 and positive 2. Okay, once I've done that, I take each factor, x squared minus 14, I said equal to 0. I take x squared plus 2, all equals 0. So I add 14 to both sides, I get x squared, all equals 14. So when I take the square root of both sides, I get x equals plus minus the square root of 14. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. And when I do that, I get x squared equals negative 2. I take the square root, and I get x equals plus or minus I squared root of 2. So those are my answers. So now to write those into equations, remember I just changed my signs. So here's my square root of 14. That'd be x minus the square root of 14. Negative square root of 14 would be x plus the square root of 14. I got I squared root of 2, so that'd be x minus I squared root of 2. And negative I squared root of 2, which would be x plus I squared root of 2. So those are written in equation form. So from answer form to equation form. Okay, number 18. It just wants me to go ahead and find the slope of these two pairs of numbers. It says find the slope of a line passing through a pair of points or state the slope is undefined. So I got negative 1 and 5. I got negative 1 and negative 6. I'm going to use the slope formula. So here's my slope formula, y sub 2 minus y sub 1 all over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So you'll notice here's my y sub 2, here's my y sub 1, and then here's my x sub 2, my second x, and my x sub 1, which is my first x. So it's just actually a matter of substitution. So I'm going to substitute it in and solve it. So substituting in those numbers, so you'll notice that my y sub 2 is negative 6, and my y sub 1 was 5. My x sub 2 is going to be negative 1 minus my x sub 1, which is going to be negative 1. And I'll scroll down just to show you that. Maybe I should write it over here real quick so we can see a little bit better. So we got negative 1 and 5, and negative 1 and negative 6. So you can see that I just substituted those in. So here was my negative 6, and here's my 5, and here's my negative 1, and here's my negative 1. So I'm going to simplify that down. My negative 6 minus 5 is going to be negative 11. Negative 1 minus minus 1 because it becomes positive. So minus minus makes that a plus. It's going to be negative 11 over 0. And so remember, anything over 0 is going to be undefined. Okay, number 19. It says solve the absolute value equation or indicate the equation has no solution. So to solve this, you'll notice we're going to solve the absolute value sign. So that's our first step. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. And when we do that, I get the absolute value of 4x plus 9 all equals 17. Okay, I'm going to drop the absolute value and write the equation twice. Once with a positive and negative answer. So here I drop the absolute value. I got 4x plus 9. I leave my answer positive. And then I also write it over here. And so I still have my 4x plus 9, but now it is negative. So I just need to solve these. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. I get 4x equals 8. I subtract 9 from both sides. I get 4x equals negative 26. And now I'm going to go ahead and divide by 4. I get my first answer of x equals 2. So now I divide both sides by 4. I get my next answer, negative 26/4. That's going to reduce down to negative 13 halves. Okay, number 20, it says we got 3x to the 5 halves minus 9 all equals 0. Just wants me to solve this equation. So to solve this equation, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And so when I add 9 to both sides, I get 3x to 5 halves equals 9. Again, I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And when I do that, I get x to 5 halves all equals 3. Okay, now I'll go ahead and get rid of this 5/2 power. I do its reciprocal, which is 2/5, so 3 to the 2/5. I put that in my calculator, so 3 to the 2/5, that's approximately equal to 1.5518.